Welcome to Asia Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Our show today, how should the United States engage China? And joining us as our special guest is Mr. Ralph Cossa. He is president of Pacific Forum CSIS, located right here in Honolulu. Ralph has over 40 years of experience in dealing with and analyzing Asian affairs. He's an internationally recognized expert on all manner of Asian affairs. He spends a large part of every year flying from one place to the other, mostly in Asia, but sometimes in Europe, to talk about Asian affairs, to confer with leaders at the highest level of the respective countries. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Ralph has probably got more airline miles than most commercial pilots do. So we're really glad to have him here with us. In fact, he just got back from Burma yesterday. Welcome to Asian Review.
Thank you, Bill. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you with us. The rebalance. Where are we in the rebalance?
Well, we just made a major step forward. Today, actually, the President signed the Trade Promotion Authority, which clears the way to move forward on the TransPacific Partnership, which is the economic linchpin of the rebalance. Had that not happened, had the Trans-Pacific Partnership not been revitalized, and it still has to be negotiated and passed, so
right.
we're not there yet, but at least it's now possible to do that. Up until this morning, it was very unlikely you could even get those kind of negotiations. Before that, the rebalance was essentially a military strategy. Now it's the multi-dimensional strategy that the administration has said all along that it was designed to be.
If we don't get it, if we don't get the Trans-Pacific Partnership for some reason, what would the impact of that be?
Well, I think it sets us back. We've been trying to establish the, quote, gold standard for trade agreements in Asia. There are other trade agreements out there, several that are being pushed by the Chinese, some that are coming in the APEC umbrella. And either we lead or we don't lead. Mm-hmm. And the TPP shows that America is still there, committed and leading and helping to set the standards. A failure to do that, then others lead and others set the standards.
And others meaning China.
Others meaning China, but I'm not crazy about broaching the TPP as a U.S. versus China, because at some point the U.S. would welcome China to join the TPP if it's prepared to meet those kind of standards. So it's setting a gold standard that hopefully China will one day embrace. But Chinese trade agreements, our trade agreements are about that thick. Chinese trade agreements are, okay, we both agree to be nice, and so it's a bit of an overstatement, I'll acknowledge, but not a lot. So, either you're going to lead or you're going to follow. And we are accustomed to leading, we are accustomed to setting high standards, and without being arrogant, which I think is one of our shortcomings, particularly in our Congress, I think there's still a necessary element of American leadership that needs to be there, and the TPP demonstrates that commitment and demonstrates that leadership in the field of trade and economics, and that's a very important field going forward.
Leadership. That's really interesting, because during the Cold War era, the United States was sort of like, okay, guys, follow me, and this is the way we're going to do it. And there wasn't much, what would she say, wiggle room? Now it requires a whole different style of leadership, doesn't it? The rebalance.
Yeah, and everyone has always had their option to follow us or not follow us, and it's never been that black and white. But certainly you were in a black and white situation where you had a bipolar world, and you had, you were either with us or against us, quote unquote, and the war on terror and all of that kind of stuff. It requires much more nuance to be a leader today. You want to get as many people into the tent as possible. Not everyone is going to agree on every subject. You don't have that existential threat that you had before. We all talk about ISIS and how terrible they are. And, to someone about to get their head cut off, they're an existential threat. But to the survival of the United States of America, they're not an existential threat. So it's harder to rally people around a threat that's a little bit harder to define.
Admiral Keating, when he was the PACOM, used to say, well, we have to learn to lead from behind. Is that concept still relevant, especially when you're talking about the rebalance?
Well, I think there are times when you need to lead from behind, and there are times when you need to lead from in front. And I guess a real diplomat and a real military leader knows the difference and knows when those times are. In the work that we do in Track 2, we have always discovered that if an American comes up with a great idea, if he can share that idea with a Filipino or with an Indonesian and have them table it, it's probably going to have a better chance of being accepted than if it's, oh, here come the Americans trying to tell us what to do again. So from that standpoint, building consensus, letting other people share the idea, letting other people get credit for the idea works to your advantage. That's, quote, leading from behind. But there are some times when you have to step up and step forward. And clearly in trying to establish the rules of trade for the 21st century, that's something where you need to be taking a proactive role. Now, there are 12 nations involved with TPP, Japan foremost among them. The Japanese have to step forward at this point now. The ball in many respects is in Mr. Abe's court as he prepared now to make the tough decisions that he had a perfect excuse for not making when the president didn't have the trade promotion authority. Now that's gone away. Now the clock is ticking. If they can't get something done here in the next couple of months, then we start getting into the silly season in Washington, and then nothing gets done until after the elections in 2016, which is, you know, a fact of life.
Everything's on hold for a year. You know, when you talk about Mr. Abe, I mean, is it fair to say he's an Asian leader that has stepped up, that has exhibited leadership?
Yeah, Mr. Abe has stepped up. He's also stepped on it on occasion, and unfortunately, there's been a little too much of the latter and none of the former. Yeah, I think that he has certainly stepped forward. He is certainly trying to move Japan into the 21st century. He's certainly trying to you know, have Japan be a, quote, more normal country. Unfortunately, he has developed a reputation, and in some cases earned a reputation of being a revisionist. If you want Japan to take a leadership role going forward, you got to talk about what Japan is doing now. You don't have to talk about, you shouldn't talk about reinventing the past. And too many people now, when they hear Abe, they think reinventing the past. To his credit, he has endorsed the statements, the Kono statement, the Moriyama apology of his predecessors, but he started off by raising questions about it, and those questions are still in people's minds, and he surrounded himself with people who were out and out revisionists and didn't fire them when they stepped on it. So you know, I think that one of the co-chairmen of my board, Rich Armitage and Joe Nye, but Joe Nye, in describing the whole collective self-defense issue with the Japanese, said it's a great package, it's lousy packaging. By sort of couching it in, you know, history terms rather than couching it in Japan has earned a right to take a more responsible role, just like Germany has, just like other countries have. It's made it counterproductive. He's become his own worst enemy in some respects. Now, Mr. Abe is not nearly as bad as the image of Abe, but when you understand that that image is there, you've got to not feed it. You've got to make sure that you're, you know, doubly cautious. I think he said all the right things when he was in Washington. I thought it was a very constructive, a very positive visit. The 50th anniversary of South Korea-Japan relations has just come and passed, and they didn't do any harm, and maybe actually did a little bit of good in getting that relationship back on track. But we've got the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War coming up, and everyone's going to be listening for how does Abe handle this? Does he use the word apology? Does he use the word repentance? Does he use the right words? I sympathize with Japanese who say, my God, how many more times do we have to apologize?
Yeah,
The
I
point
sympathize
is,
with that perspective as well.
you keep apologizing until you don't have to anymore. And when you start bringing up questioning history, then you force people to ask for more apologies. So it's been a self-inflicted wound in some respects. I hope he does the right thing. He's certainly got a lot of people giving him advice.
I've read Mr. Mariano's apology. I thought it was very, very moving, especially he was a soldier in the Japanese Imperial Army in China, and I thought because of that, his apology had extra weight. I thought it was very, very moving.
No, it was. He was also a socialist. He was in a coalition with the LDP. So people will say, yeah, well, that was Mariano's view. He's more of a touchy-feely type guy, but the LDP is who's in power now, and we need to have an equivalent statement from an LDP leader. Abe went to Yasukuni Shrine. The Yasukuni Shrine is, to many people in the world, a very reprehensible place because of the war criminals being enshrined there, and also because of the museum there, which is in fact reprehensible.
I would agree with you. I've been to that museum, and I agree with you. It is reprehensible.
So, these are self-inflicted wounds that hopefully we can get beyond with a meaningful, sincere statement on the 70th anniversary.
Do you find many countries in Asia interested in the RCEP, how should I say, the other pending trade agreement?
Yeah, let's keep in mind there are some countries that are involved in both. And these are not mutually exclusive trade agreements. TPP, presumably, now it hasn't been fully negotiated, maybe it'll turn out to be a bronze standard rather than a gold standard. We don't know, but it's supposedly at a somewhat higher level, takes a lot of other concerns, labor issues, environmental issues into concern that I don't think the RCEP quite deals with. So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think they would feed one another. And again, the idea that somehow or other these are dueling free trade pacts is foolish, because there are some countries that are part of both.
How would you assess the importance of the Asia Pacific versus the Middle East in the United States?
In the long term, I think Asia is more important. But when you have somebody shooting at you, that tends to sort of focus. There's a difference between the important and the urgent. The Middle East keeps managing to make itself urgent, and so we keep spending a lot of time and focus there, which we should. I mean, we can't turn our back on any area of the world, but I think there was a recognition, and I would mention that the pivot is not new. Bill. The term is new, but the decision to shift our focus toward Asia came in the Bush administration, the George H.W. Bush administration.
Okay.
Go back and look, 1989, 1991, East Asia Strategy Initiative.
Okay.
Essentially, it said the 21st century will be the Pacific century, and we need to focus our efforts there. So we drew down in Asia, in Europe, and we maintained our levels in Asia. Bill Clinton came in, produced 2 more East Asia strategy reports, essentially said the same thing. Asia is the future, Pacific century, we need a new Pacific community, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea that our future rests with Asia, Barack Obama didn't discover that. What Barack Obama was trying to do with the pivot was reassure people that that priority that we had laid out in 1989, 1991, at the end of the Cold War, was still there, that we were still interested, because people had in their vision, America has now become so preoccupied, bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan, that you're sort of forgetting Asia, and we haven't forgotten Asia. So if it would have been called the reaffirmation instead of the rebalance, I think we would have all, been much better off. But You know, every politician has to come up with their own phrase. I can guarantee you that whoever becomes president in 2016 will come up with a new phrase, and it will essentially mean the same thing, that Asia is important and we need to focus on Asia.
We're going to take a break here. You're watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Ralph Cossa. The title of today's show is How Should the United States Engage China? And we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii. And I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidel and the ThinkTech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we'd love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
Welcome back to Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Ralph Cossa. We've been talking about a number of issues, all focused on contemporary Asian issues. We're talking a little bit about the TPP. We're also talking a little bit about Japanese Prime Minister Abe and the relative importance to the United States in the Middle East versus the Asia-Pacific region. Sometimes when I think about the Middle East, I remember that the British, I think it was around 1955, and they had that retreat east of Suez, and I thought, boy, wouldn't that be nice for the U.S. to have its own version? But as you say, the U.S. can't do that. It simply can't do that. And it has responsibilities there, and as you say, people are shooting. But boy, it sounds pretty tempting at times.
No, I know. Bill, I spent a couple of years of my military career working on the Middle East. I was so happy to come back to working on Asia. And in my view, in the Middle East, all the solutions are obvious, but no one will ever take them. It's, you know, the belief is the last man standing wins. Whereas in Asia, it may be more complicated, but if you can come up with a solution, a win-win, people might actually try it. And that, to me, is the big difference between the Middle East and Asia.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting perspective. Well, I think it's fair to say, based on what you said just before the break, that some people sometimes say that, well, the U.S. is putting too many eggs in the Asia-Pacific basket, okay? If this is the center of global growth in the years to come, why is it that all these countries there are having, you know, fairly major problems? Japan still really hasn't pulled itself out of the 20-year era of doldrums. China is, you know, there's more and more skepticism about the Chinese economy. Korea's got some real pluses, but it's got some real minuses. But even with all that, Asia's where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, take economic advice from a political scientist, you're putting yourself at risk. So you know, keep that in mind. This is not my area of expertise. But clearly, you know, it's not just China. India is also, you know, a country with great potential.
Okay.
It always has been, always will be. But I think they're starting to actually get their act together in many respects. Indonesia is, I think, another area of great potential that is starting to realize it. And if I was on Wall Street giving investment advice, I'd be saying Vietnam. I think Japan is the past, China is the present, Vietnam is the future. You've got the rule of law, you've got a society now that is still ruled by a couple of dinosaurs. But anyone that you meet who's 40 years old or younger in Vietnam has a degree from the London School of Economics or the Fletcher School. I mean, these are incredibly bright, ready to go, just waiting for a few more dinosaurs to die, and they're going to leap forward. So it's not just China. It's Asia writ large, it's Indonesia, it's India, it's Vietnam, it's the whole ASEAN economic community that's being developed, which I think is going to help move forward. Even I think Burma's on the verge of, you know, Myanmar moving forward. They're struggling, but I think there's great potential throughout the region.
Let's come back to Burma a little bit later, because you just came back from Burma. Okay, so Asia's where it's at. Where are we in our relationship with China, especially given the tension that has grown in the last few weeks in the South China Sea? And then we just had the Security and Economic Dialogue, 7th Security and Economic Dialogue that finished in Beijing last week. But some people say, you know, the relationship's tightening up. It's getting a little bit more acrimonious.
Yeah.
What's your take?
It's complicated.
Okay.
I think complicated is probably the best term. You know, if you said describe it in one word, it's cooperative. If you said describe it in 2 words, it's not cooperative. You know, it's. I think there are pluses, there are minuses. At the end of the day, both leaders understand that they've got to get this right, and that putting the 2 countries on a collision course serves neither one's national interests. And I think there's a recognition of that in China. I know there's a recognition of that in the United States. Quite frankly, people are still trying to figure out just who Xi Jinping is. I find it fascinating when I talk to people in China, and I'll say, help me understand left and right. All right. Mao Zedong, left. Deng Xiaoping, right. Zhou Enlai, right. Bo Xilai, left. And I'll say, Xi Jinping, and they stop. And they go, well, you know, and some people say he's signaling left and turning right. And others say, no, he's signaling right, but he's turning left. Or, well, in economic terms, he's Deng Xiaoping, but in political terms, he's Mao Zedong. Well, I don't know how you be a clone of Mao and Deng at the same time. So, and people, after several years of the leadership, are still not sure. Is this anti-corruption campaign really aimed at rooting out corruption at the base level, regardless of who it touches? Or is it just part of a power play to make sure all of his adversaries are pushed away so that he can sort of develop this cult of personality? And in fact, that's what he seems to be doing, much more so than any leader since Mao or Deng. It's, you know, it's all about Xi all the time. You know, it's not clear exactly where they're going. I tell my Chinese friends, not that they like to hear this, but I say, beware of premature arrogance. You know, coming from Americans who have majored in arrogance for many years, you probably don't want to hear that, but you know, you're not there yet. I tell people in Asia, beware of the Wizard of Oz effect. You recall the story, you know, this gigantic wizard up there on the screen, and then, you know, Toto looks behind the screen, it's this little short guy casting a big shadow. China today is that little short guy casting this big shadow. If you're the Philippines, oh my God, you're reacting to the shadow.
Right.
United States, we're bigger than the shadow, and we're certainly bigger than the guy casting it, and we need to sort of keep that in perspective. I think someone once said, maybe it was me, I hope it was me, I'll claim it was me, but you know, that, you know, China is the 800-pound gorilla, but we're still a 1,600-pound gorilla, so let's not get, you know, too concerned about that. And the Chinese understand that. There may be others that think China is going to surpass the United States in A, B, and C, but most Chinese don't believe that. They understand their limitations, and at the end of the day, whose problems would you rather have, ours or China's?
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
People say that the military gap has been significantly decreased.
Yeah.
Would you buy into that?
Again, relatively, the gap. It used to be like this. We've gone to here, the Chinese have gone to here. So relatively, the gap is closed. On the other hand, 20 years ago when I started, or 40 years ago when I started playing this game in Asia, the US and the Soviet Union were like that, all right? Now Russians are down here somewhere below the Chinese trying to get back up.
Right.
So relatively speaking, the gap between the US and China has decreased. Relatively speaking, the gap between the United States and the closest peer competitor has widened because China is nowhere near where the Soviet Union used to be. We don't have, maybe 20 years from now, China will be a peer competitor like the Soviet Union was 20 years ago. But we discovered that the Soviet Union was actually walking on eggshells and was, you know, a house of cards. And right now, China may be discovering it's got some of those same problems. So I don't dismiss Chinese capabilities. You know, I think what China has accomplished economically is phenomenal. More importantly, what they've accomplished sociologically, the millions of people, starving people who are no longer starving people. Now you worry about pollution because there's so many cars, whereas before you worried about being run over by a bicycle. I mean, the progress, the quality of life in many respects has improved sufficiently to the point that people now complain about quality of life, air pollution, as opposed to not having food. A whole different set of challenges, but one that this government now has to deal with. So I have great respect for what China has accomplished. Don't mean to, you know, be dismissing that, but China is becoming the big kid on its block. It's not. It's got a long ways to go yet before it's going to really challenge the U.S. And oh, by the way, we have a lot of very important allies and alliances, and the Chinese don't have allies. They say they don't want allies. I think they'd love to have them if they could. You know, I went to a Sun Tzu conference in China a couple of years ago, and they were all complaining about U.S. alliances, and I read a couple of quotes from Sun Tzu about the value of having strong alliances. I told them Barack Obama was following Sun Tzu more than Xi Jinping was.
We're going to take another break here. You're watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Ralph Cossa. We've been talking about a number of issues that contemporary Asia is dealing with, and we'll be right back, so don't go away.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
Welcome back to Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Mr. Ralph Cossa. He is president of Pacific Forum CSIS. Our topic today is how should the U.S. engage China? Mill-to-mill relations, military-to-military relations between the United States and China. What are they achieving?
I think they're achieving a little better understanding on both sides as to what's important, what's not important, capabilities, how to avoid accidents and conflict, which I think are very important issues. And the more the Chinese see how we operate, I think the more they understand how big the gap still is between the two. I recall hosting Tim Keating, you mentioned him previously, at a meeting at CSIS, and somebody asked him about what do you have to say about the Chinese aircraft carrier? And Keating's remark was, I wish him a lot of luck, it's a lot tougher than it looks.
I've heard that from him.
And it was a perfect comment. I mean, the Pacific Forum has been holding nuclear dialogues with the Chinese, bringing together our people from Strategic Command and from the Pentagon and Pacific Command to talk with their second artillery and talk with their nuclear specialists, because it's vital to understand what different things could signal or not signal and why it's important. The Chinese have tested anti-satellite capabilities, for instance. From a U.S. perspective, during the Cold War, there was an understanding between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. You blind our eyes in the sky, we have to assume that that's a signal of an impending attack. And that could result in a launch of nuclear weapons. And the Chinese say, trust us, we have a no first use policy. Well, we're not going to bet the future of the United States on whether or not this no first use policy is political or military, or whether it can't be changed by a check mark on a decision paper. So for the Chinese to understand the implications of attacking America's eyes in the sky was a very important thing. And to have that discussion is critical. Chinese are now talking about SSBNs, putting nuclear warheads on missiles on submarines. The Chinese land-based nuclear missile force, they don't keep the warheads on the missiles. So there's no worry about an inadvertent launch. There's no worry about some guy in the missile silo deciding, well, I think I'll start World War III. We have all sorts of procedures in place in the United States to make sure that some guy doesn't get bored in a silo hole in Omaha, Nebraska or something and start a war. How do you handle that when you're on a submarine? Do you give those people authority? Do you have ways to make sure that a Chinese submarine commander can't do something like that? We need to be talking about that. We need to be providing assurances to one another that we're not going to have some kind of inadvertent conflict, and how do you avoid that? These are the types of things that are of critical importance, and that requires military sitting down and talking to military about that. We're not going to hand them, training manuals to say, here's how you can shoot Americans better. I mean, that's not what it's all about. But if you bring a Chinese pilot who's learning how to do V-style aircraft, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and you bring them and let them start watching our fighter jets taking off and landing on this little floating cork in the middle of the ocean, they come away going, whoa, maybe we shouldn't mess with these guys. That's not a bad message to take home.
Okay, so you dismissed the idea that some people would say, well, the Chinese just use these mill-to-mill relations to milk us for intelligence information.
I mean, first of all, we're always milking one another for intelligence information. And, you know, we've had this latest big scandal. You know, my view of that was shame on us. If we didn't figure out that, you know, we couldn't protect our personnel information. We've been telling the Chinese for years, look, fight fair with cyber. You want to come after military targets, that's fine. We're going after your military targets. Just quit the industrial espionage. Quit the, you know, spying on Sony or Lockheed or somewhere like that. So now the Chinese are presuming they did it, and pretty clear they did, are going after military targets. Shame on us if we're not protecting those targets. And we're certainly going after theirs as well. If we're not,
we've
the
got a
matter
big
with us?
problem.
I mean, we're doing that to our friends, you know. I mean, according to all of these leaks, you know, we're listening to Chancellor Merkel and the French president. So, you know, hopefully we're trying to figure out what the Chinese are saying too. That's sort of fair game, and you know, and that's what you do. But you don't gain a lot of intelligence by sitting on a deck and watching aircraft fly around or watching military capabilities.
There seems to be some indications in the last, I don't know, let's say month, that the United States is ramping up its relationship with Taiwan. The Taiwan military was invited to this conference at Bellows about amphibious assaults. The PRC was not invited. The chief of naval operations from Taiwan was invited to the recent PACOM change of command ceremony. There have been sister military relationships created between U.S. military units and Taiwan military units. It seems like, there's just a couple of things. It seems like the relationship is being ramped up.
I don't know that it's being ramped up, Bill. I think it's always been very solid, and there's certainly been a very solid mill-to-mill relationship with us in Taiwan, and we feel an obligation to help them defend themselves, and we've, I think, taken that responsibility seriously, and we've had Taiwan senior visitors coming into PACOM when I was on active duty 20-some years ago, so this is certainly not nothing new. I think it shows the health of that relationship, and you know, the commitment on Taiwan's part to continue to be able to defend itself and to not negotiate with the mainland from a position of weakness. And I think that's important, and we have an obligation under the Taiwan Relations Act to help them in that regard. Do the Chinese like that? No. But you know, but they understand it, and I think they even respect us for it. Every once in a while you get a silly article, and there's this guy, Charles Glaser, who just wrote something about, well, let's swap Taiwan for, you know, for the South China Sea. Well, first of all, Taiwan's not ours to give away. And the South China Sea, there are 3 or 4 other players, including Taiwan, who are factors in there. So how do you get Taiwan to cooperate in the South China Sea if you've just given them away, quote unquote, to the Chinese? And quite frankly, if the U.S. were to end all military support to Taiwan, if I was the national security advisor in Taiwan, I would recommend 3 things: nuclear weapons, and more nuclear weapons.
I agree with that.
So, you know, so it's in China's interest to see us providing Taiwan with enough security that they're willing to talk to the mainland and willing to not pursue other means to defend themselves.
I agree with your comments about Charles Glaser. He troubles me. Maybe that's the kindest way to put it.
Well, you know, it's a social scientist looking at it from a strictly academic standpoint without any notion of reality, I think. But, you know.
We should point out he's not related to Bonnie Glaser.
He's not related to Bonnie. That's
very
correct. And he's a serious scholar. I don't, you know, I think he's drawing the wrong conclusions and not factoring in enough other things.
You know, you spent a lot of your career thinking about all manner of issues in Asia, but it's especially been interested in Korea. And tell us about this issue between the United States and Korea on the THAAD. It seems like the U.S. wants to place these sort of missiles, I believe it was along the western coast of South Korea. And
I mean,
the
there's-
Koreans are balking.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that this has been a debate that's been going on in the newspapers, and it's a debate that's been going on in propaganda channels with the North Koreans and with the Chinese and with others. The U.S. is not formally asked, to my understanding, is not formally asked to put THAAD there. And the South Korean position is when you formally ask, we'll sit down and talk about it. THAAD is the Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, which in some respects can protect South Korea against North Korean missiles. It also, as I understand it, can be used to protect the United States against North Korean missiles. You may
Sitting here in
recall the
Hawaii,
North
we're
Koreans-
interested in this
Yeah,
kind of thing.
you know, they can't reach, I don't think, the mainland yet, but they can reach, presumably, according to their theory, they can reach Hawaii. Now, their accuracy is such that, you know, we'd be more concerned with the whales than with people on Oahu, but still, it's something you have to factor in, and if there's an ability to improve your air defenses in that area, you should at least take a look at it. But it's already the Chinese that are trying to pressure South Korea not to allow something that we haven't even asked them to do yet, and it sort of shows, it says more about China than it does about South Korea or the United States. This is part of, you know, how far can China push somebody, and are you going to kowtow preemptively to China? So far, the South Koreans haven't, to their credit.
Oh, I see. I thought the U.S. had asked South Korea, and South Korea was...
No, in fact,
hesitant.
I think I'm accurately quoting Mark Lippert, our ambassador to
Sure.
Korea. I just read something this morning where he said this is still a premature issue. We're still, you know, sort of looking at it. We haven't reached any decisions. So, to my knowledge, anyway, I may be wrong on that. I occasionally got something wrong, but I think I don't think we've come to that.
Well, given
point
the
yet.
complexity of Asian affairs, everybody's allowed a
Yeah.
mistake once in a
Yeah,
while.
thank you. Thanks.
You just came back from Burma.
Yeah. Myanmar,
Myanmar.
as I prefer to
Yeah,
call it. even though
Myanmar.
we-
I'm still transitioning.
Yeah, so is the U.S. government.
Richard Armitage at the dinner, your annual dinner,
Yeah.
a couple months ago, he was saying he thought, if I'm quoting it correctly, that the U.S. had taken the victory lap a little too early on Myanmar.
Yeah.
Is that so?
I,
Do you agree with your chair or disagree?
yeah, no, I agree with a lot of things that Rich says. I don't agree with everything. But I think in this case, I've argued that.
We're down to 1 minute.
Okay, it's not over yet. It could still go poorly. We've also put too much emphasis on Aung San Suu Kyi and not enough emphasis on the broader political process, which in the long run is what really is going to matter. So we're not out of the woods yet, but I think it has been a major accomplishment of the Obama administration in Asia.
Great, great. Well, you give us a lot to think about, as always, and I'd like to thank everybody for watching us today and tuning in, and we'll see you here the next time.